السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, we will be continuing our halaqah series on Islam and critical thinking after the sunnah prayers, inshallah. So everyone is welcome to join us. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
بس هات بقى كرسي. ادي كرسي. احنا بنمشي ولا اي كرسي؟ هات اي واحد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa zidna ilman. Ameen ya Rabbi, Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. All right, Jazakumullah khairan everyone for joining us again for another session of our halaqah series on critical thinking from an Islamic perspective, where we examine the Islamic understanding of the aql, the Islamic understanding of human rationality. And we've talked about how that understanding differs from how rationality is understood in Western philosophy and in Western culture. And we mentioned many different things. I think we mentioned like 15 different points. Of the main points that we mentioned was that when you look at the concept of the aql, the concept of the intellect in the Islamic tradition, in the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the works of scholars, the concept of the aql has a moral component to it. The concept of the aql has a moral component. It's related to whether a person does right or wrong, right? It's related to restraining oneself from doing wrong actions and striving to do right actions. Whereas when you look at the concept of the aql in Western philosophy, it's related to philosophical debates. It's not related directly to ethical action and how to live as a moral person. In fact, this is something that generally people exclude when people say, oh, he's a smart person, but he's not very moral or whatever. Even in the way people talk, they kind of exclude that concept. And we talked about other differences. We talked about the emphasis on knowledge, on guidance, on reading, on immersing oneself in ibadah. All of these different things are related to the aql from the Islamic perspective. And we talked about the history of the aql. So the history of the aql, when we examine what is the history of this concept, the history of the concept of rationality, tarikh of the aql, we went back to the creation of Adam alayhi salam. And we talked about how Adam alayhi salam was favored over the angels with the gift of knowledge, and how this was tied to its ethical function, right? From the beginning, when the angels said, are you going to make a creation that will cause bloodshed and spread corruption? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed the angels the virtue of Adam alayhi salam by teaching him the names of all things. So this aql that Adam alayhi salam has been blessed with, it allows a human being, even when they're on this earth, to understand the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand the purpose for which they were created, to understand how to live a good life, to understand how the purpose of our lives, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be moral custodians on this earth, to be the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. So the aql allows a human being to understand these different concepts. And when a human being understands this, they are able to avoid the path of fasad and take the path of virtue, the path of righteousness. And that is something that we see in the story of Adam alayhi salam. We also talked about how when Adam alayhi salam was sent down to the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extracted from him the souls of all of his descendants. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took a covenant, an agreement with the descendants of Adam alayhi salam, that is us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us a question before we came into this worldly existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us, Alastu bi rabbikum. This is the mithaq. Am I not your Lord? And we all said, Bala shahidna. Yes, we testify. We testify, O Allah, you are our Lord. So this knowledge of the mithaq, this is not something any of us remembers, right? This is not something in our physical memory. But that spiritual memory of the mithaq is preserved in the form of the fitrah. So the fitrah of the human being, the natural inclination of the human being, guides a person towards what is right and away from what is wrong. Guides a person to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Guides a person to understand that their life has a purpose to it. To understand that, all of this is not meaningless. We didn't pop into existence as the result of blind chemical and particle interactions. Rather, our lives have a meaning, an objective, and a purpose. And we have to understand that purpose in order to live a good life.
and to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fulfill the rights of His creation. So the fitrah is tied to the aql, and the fitrah is tied to our moral responsibilities. And we explained also how the aql is basically based on the fitrah. Right? The fitrah lays the foundation for the aql. And then the aql extends and applies that. The fitrah is like the software that you get with your phone. Right? It gives you the basics, and then you use that software to add more data, add your own programs, develop more things. Whatever you want to do, you're building on that basic programming that you come with. That's your default programming, the fitrah. So we mentioned that as well. And then we talked also about what are the sources of misguidance for the aql. And we mentioned the story of Iblis, Shaitan, and how he whispered to Adam alayhi salam in the garden of Jannah. He whispered to him to eat from the tree. And he gave him false temptations. He said, هَلْ أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى شَجَرَةِ الْخُلْدِ وَمُلْكٍ لَا يَبْلَى. Should I not show you the tree of eternity and a kingdom that will never disappear? Right? So he gave Adam a.s. these false temptations, and that is how Shaitan tried to deceive Adam a.s. And we explained how the aql is always battling these forces of misguidance. The satanic whisperings, right? Satanic inspiration. And we mentioned other sources of thoughts. Who can remember what were the other sources of thoughts that we mentioned, aside from Shaitan? So there are negative thoughts that can come from Shaitan. What are the other sources of thoughts we talked about 2 weeks ago? Yes. Nafs, okay. So nafs can give negative thoughts. It can also give positive thoughts. Depends on whether it is nafs al-ammarati bis-su, or nafs al-lawama, or nafs al-mutma'inna. Right? So these are the levels of the nafs and how much a person has trained and disciplined their nafs. So the nafs is the second source, and what's the third source? Yes. Angels. So angels is the third source. In fact, Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, at the end of his work, Ar-Rad' ala al-Mantiqiyin, the whole last, maybe like 30, 40 pages is just about how angels are a source of inspiration, which is very interesting, because you would think this has to do with logic and the aql and the intellect, and he's talking about angels as a source of inspiration, because you can't separate logic from human psychology. If you want to talk about how do you arrive at the correct conclusions, you also have to understand what are the sources of thoughts in the human mind, and how do you discipline your thoughts to avoid making errors. So angels is the third source, and then the fourth source of thoughts is, we mentioned, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in Arabic, what do we call that? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a good inspiration to a person. Yes. Ilham. Ilham, very good. Ilham is the fourth source. So we talked about these different sources of thoughts. Now, if we look at the Quran, right? We see that the Quran concludes with Al-Mu'awwidhatayn, right? These two surahs, short surahs, that we are encouraged to recite on a daily basis, right? We're encouraged to recite this as part of our adhkar of the morning and the evening. And when you look at these two surahs, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ and قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, you see that these surahs are guiding us to avoid two negative sources of thoughts, or two sources of misguidance, two sources of evil. So Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas, what is the difference between these two surahs? Yes. That's right. Yeah. So Surah Al-Falaq is warning us about the external sources of evil. And Surah Al-Nas is warning us about the internal sources of evil. Min sharril waswasil khannas, right? So the shaitan's whisperings, that's an internal source, right? The nafs is an internal source. So what we've talked about so far, these are the internal sources. Now today I want to talk about some of the external sources. Well, the external sources of misguidance that came in the history of the aql. Okay? So we talked about the sources of guidance. We talked about how the aql has been created for the purpose of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how it has an ethical function, how it's connected to the fitrah, how it receives guidance, hidayah and wahi. We talked about the sources of thoughts, both positive, negative. Now, what are the external sources of misguidance? And here we come to a very interesting topic, which is the genesis of shirk. How did shirk begin in the history of human beings? And what is the impact of shirk on the aql of the human beings? So, who can tell us, what are your thoughts about how did shirk first begin? When did it first begin and how? Whatever you've come across on this subject. Yes. Okay. Okay, so over time, the respect for people who were pious turned into worship. Anyone want to add anything to that? Yes. Iblis's arrogance. Okay. So this is different because this is for shaitan, but now we're talking about for human beings. What are the sources of misguidance for human beings? Yes. Right, so Adam alayhi salam, when he comes down, there's a hadith that mentions between Adam alayhi salam and Nuh alayhi salam are 10 qurun. Okay, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. All of them upon tawheed. All of them upon tawheed. Now, there is a difference of opinion on how to understand this narration. Okay, so first of all, you can understand the word qurun itself in two ways. What are the two ways that we can understand it? Sorry? Century, excellent. Or? Century, a period of time. There's another way. Generation, right? Yeah, excellent. So, if you understand it as 10 centuries, right? So then we're talking about a millennium, 1,000 years. And that's a specific, very specific period. If you say 10 generations, that's less time actually. That's less time because how many generations in a century? Maybe 3 generations in a century, right? So that would be even a shorter amount of time between Adam alayhi salam and Nuh alayhi salam. However, scholars also said that if you look at the full wording, when the Prophet says, or when it's mentioned in the narration, that there are 10 generations, all of them between Adam and Nuh upon Tawheed, it could mean that out of all the generations between Adam and Nuh, alayhi salam, there are 10 generations that were upon Tawheed before shirk crept in. Right? Because we know that by the time of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, there's already shirk. That's why Prophet Nuh alayhi salam is giving da'wah to his people. So that's if that's the case, then we don't know how much time passed between Adam alayhi salam and Nuh. It could be Allahu A'lam, right? An indefinite amount of time. But of that, there are 10 generations or 10 centuries, whatever you want to say, that were upon Tawheed. So this is, and really when you study human history and prehistory, Allahu A'lam, like we don't know what happened prehistory, but it seems like the amount of time human beings have been on this earth suggests that there was a much longer period of time, right? Up until Adam alayhi salam. So this is one of the points. Now, the narration mentions, there's a narration that mentions, Abdullah ibn Abbas mentions, that initially what happened was there were certain pious people who, when they passed away, people came with the idea, and in some narrations it mentions Shaitan gave them this idea that you should just put something to designate the place where they used to sit, just out of respect for them. This person used to sit and give a halaqah here, just put something to remember them. And then after that generation passed away, then the next generation, he gives the idea, you know, the people before you, they used to worship these things, right? So then they go from respect to worship. And this is the natural human process, that human beings, when they naturally start to exaggerate in praise of someone or something, there is a very thin line that starts to be crossed when people go into excessive praise and worship. And subhanAllah, you even see this in popular culture when people are praising things. People say about other human beings, oh, this person is the God of this. Like, I've even come across in medicine, people say, oh, so and so, he's the God of neurosurgery. What do you mean he's the God of neurosurgery, right? And sometimes, like, you have a trainee who works with you, and they get so excited, they're like, oh, you're the God of this subject. And I'm like, no, I'm not God, right? Get your shit out of here. So people naturally, they start to do these kind of things. It comes into the culture and the language, the way they start to use their language. They exaggerate and praise so much that they start to go into elements of shirk. You see this with celebrity worship. You see this with people obsessing about their favorite athlete or favorite team, favorite politician, whatever it is, this type of fanaticism, which leads people to this kind of shirk. So we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, he said to his people, he called his people to Tawheed, and they said, وَقَالُوا, they said, do not abandon وَدًّا وَلَا سُعَاعًا وَلَا يَغُوثَ وَيَعُوقَ وَنَصْرًا. Do not abandon these 5 names, Wad, Su'a, Yaghuth, Ya'uq, and Nasr. These were the 5 idols that the people of Nuh alayhi salam used to worship, and it started in this way, where these were perhaps righteous individuals that after time, that's mentioned in the tafsir, after time people started to idolize and worship. And this is the case with every human society. It gradually went from a state of tawheed to a state of idolatry and worshipping idols. And as the excessive praise and glorification creeps in, then people start to create mythology around the idols and around the deities, right? So the mythology starts to creep in, and you see how the gods that people invent in their minds, in their shirk, are basically just a group of human beings behaving immorally. Subhanallah. Wal-'iyadhu billah. So if you look at the mythologies that you find around ancient human cultures, look at Norse mythology, for example, look at Aztec mythology, look at Babylonian mythology, look at all these different things, look at ancient Egyptian mythology, you will see how these mythologies have examples of quote-unquote gods committing immoral actions. This one murders his brother, this one commits adultery, this one does that, behaves with jealousy, with arrogance and whatever. So people not only create these images, but instead of thinking that these are examples of moral virtue, they make them examples of immorality. And this leads us to an important aspect of how shirk affects people's cognitive faculties, how shirk affects people's moral intuitions. What do you think the impact will be when people think that the worst beings are the gods, right? The worst beings are these immoral deities, right? How will it lead people to behave themselves, right, in their own actions and interactions? So that is one element of how shirk affects people's aql and distorts the way that people think about reality. But there are, in fact, many other ways in which shirk is harmful for people. First and foremost, shirk leads to a distorted understanding of our reality. It leads to a distorted understanding of what is the nature of this world. This world has been created by one creator for a purpose, subjected to certain laws, right? Natural laws, moral laws. Shirk leads to a distorted understanding of this. So shirk leads to a distorted understanding of this reality, because what happens is people start to, when they have this mythology, what did these ancient civilizations start to do? They started to attribute different phenomenon in nature to different idols. Right? So this tribe has this idol, this tribe has that idol, this tribe has this god, quote unquote, this tribe has that god. And they say, for example, oh, the Nile River overflows every year because the Egyptian god Isis, as she's looking for her husband that was killed, and these kind of mythologies, right? So they're no longer able to have a rational understanding of reality. It compromises a person's rational understanding. And if you don't understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in complete control of everything, you'll not understand the nature of our existence as human beings. You will not understand that everything in your life occurs according to a purpose, according to a hikmah that is planned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you to benefit and to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an important element of having the Tawheedic worldview, having a worldview that is based in Tawheed. So the first problem with shirk and that in how it relates to the aql is it leads to a distorted understanding of reality, where people elevate created beings, whether idols of stone or other human beings, to the position of having supernatural powers. The second problem is that shirk leads to a dependence on false deities. So when people turn to these different false deities, they start to place their tawakkul in them. They start to place their trust in them. And this is not just in terms of ancient mythology, right? Where people call out to Zeus or Odin or all these different ancient gods. Even today, when people elevate something, like maybe it is the importance of a political government, right? Or a politician, or the importance of a certain celebrity, or or a certain popular fad, right? And they become obsessed with that fad, to the extent they worship that, and they put all their reliance in that popular fad. Can anyone think of any examples of this from today's culture, where people put all their dependence on something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes.
I'm seeing some trends that may actually increase more in the future, which is the deification of AI.
Deification of AI, excellent. This is a huge one right now, yeah. So this is actually one of the examples where one of my trainees, he was like, oh, ChatGPT is basically a god, right? He just said that. I'm like, wow, perfect example of modern shirk, right? People are talking about computer programs as though they are deities. And to the extent that the power that they give them, they look at them as our future overlords. Oh, in the future, all human beings will be enslaved. These AI robots will control us. We should just start worshiping them now so they're happy with us. Look at the level of the thought process that people go along with. So AI is a huge one that people are already starting to deify, and we will continue in the coming years to see more deification of AI. By the way, since we're talking about AI, I think there's a very interesting point when we go back to the story of Adam alayhi salam. There's a very interesting point when we go back to the story of Adam alayhi salam and we compare it with artificial intelligence. Adam alayhi salam is favored with the aql. AI has artificial intelligence. What is the difference between the human aql and AI? Can AI replicate the human aql? So already we can see how this is more of a problem in Western philosophy than it will be in the Islamic tradition. Because for us, the aql includes the moral, the spiritual dimensions. It's not just data, it includes actions, it includes understanding, it includes wisdom. Whereas in Western philosophy, intelligence has been reduced to just data, right? Just looking something up. Actually, interesting thing. The other day, a Sesame Street video, my son was watching a Sesame Street video, and you see how this creeps in even at the age of a toddler, right? It says, what do we do when we don't know something? We look it up. And they keep mentioning this. Look it up, look it up. It's like interesting how epistemology, how the sources of knowledge are presented to a child, right? Not you ask somebody who knows about it. Not you seek guidance from somebody who is an expert, a teacher, a scholar, or a parent. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge, of remembrance, if you don't know. Instead, you look it up yourself. Go on the internet, Google it yourself. Now you have knowledge. That is what ilm is. So you see, this is ingrained in every level of popular culture. And this is why this idea of AI taking over is something that is freaking people out. Because if that's your only understanding of intelligence, of just looking it up, right? Of course, AI can do that 1,000 times better than a human being. It can look up 1,000 more sources than a human being can in a split second. But is that what aql is? Is that what intelligence is? When you go back to the story of Adam alayhi salam and you compare it with what an AI can do, there's a profound difference. And that is the following. If you look at the history of how AI has been developed, one of the things that is very interesting is that when Google was trying to teach an AI how to recognize a picture of a cat, they had to feed in like hundreds of thousands of images of a cat in order for AI to take all the data, process that data, and create some kind of generic representation of what a cat is. Right? Now when you're talking to your children, when you're raising a toddler, your toddler can identify instinctively what a cat is, having seen maybe a couple images, and they understand. Why is that the case? Why do they not need to process all this data? Because the human being has this capacity for language that is, what is language? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. The first gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to the human being is al-bayan, elaborating meaning. The human being has the ability to abstract meaning and to understand meanings of things. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches Adam alayhi salam the names of all things, Adam alayhi salam understands concepts. And the children of Adam understand the concept as a whole. So you don't need to process all this data to come up with some kind of average representation of this is what a cat is. You're able to abstract and understand the mere concept of a cat. Because this deals with something that Muslim scholars talked about in tremendous detail, which is the difference between kulliyat and juz'iyat. Okay, so kulliyat are the universals, and juz'iyat are the particulars. In the world around us, there are only juz'iyat. Right? There are only particulars, right? There is this chair, this particular chair, that chair, whatever, right? Now a human being, when they see this is what we call a chair, this is what we call it. You could see different types of chairs. They will look very different. And yet a human being understands the generic concept of a chair. How does that happen? And why is it so hard for AI to replicate that process? Because the human being, they're able to abstract from the juz'iyat a kulliyat, a kulli, a meaning that is universal. And that has a wujud dhihni. It has an existence in the mind. It doesn't have wujud khariji. It doesn't have existence in the outside world. But they look at all the things that are the juz'iyat and they identify what is the qadr mushtarak. What is the shared common property among these things through this process of qiyas, through this process of comparison. So actually, comparative reasoning is one of the processes that is integral to the human mind. Right? And it's interesting how your child will learn this. In developmental psychology, now they study how children naturally use comparisons to formulate their knowledge, right? So, for example, a child understands, okay, this is mama, this is baba. Then anytime they see, another child with a mother figure, with a father figure, they say, that's their mama, that's their baba, based on qiyas, based on comparison. And from that, they extract a general meaning. They never learn a definition, like you have to program for a computer, that the definition of a mother is a biological female who gives birth. No, children don't learn that. They understand the concept without having to learn the definition. This is the first thing that Ibn Taymiyyah talks about in Ar-Radd ala al-Mantiqiyin. The fact that al-ilm, knowledge, does not depend on knowing definitions. Definitions help in making distinctions. If you want to make a distinction in something, you can come up with a definition. But the concepts are things that people naturally acquire based on this natural human process of reasoning. Okay? So this is an important distinction between the human mind, which is based on comprehension, based on understanding, based on abstraction, and an artificial intelligence, which is based on data processing. Right? So computers do computation, humans do interpretation. Human beings identify a meaning underlying something abstract. Whereas computers, they try to put together all this data and then use some statistical modeling to understand what's significant about this data. Right? So that's where how AI differs from human intelligence. And there's other research on this as well. You know, this was an interesting conversation I had with some brothers who are AI scientists. And they explained a lot of the things that, you know, you can feed to an artificial intelligence a picture that for us looks meaningless, and it will look at this pattern of pixels and say, oh, that's a cat, that's a dog, right? It's very easy to fool an AI if you know how an AI works. So that's an interesting tangent because you mentioned AI. So it's one of the examples where people are deifying something that is makhluk of human beings, right? Human beings made AI, and people are now committing shirk with AI and elevating it to the status of God and putting their dependence on it as well. Yes.
Another point here. Usually, at least for me, I was kind of maybe a little bit influenced with the Western context I'm in. When I used to think of a super being, I always go for the issue of super intelligence.
Right.
But now AI is showing you that a super being who's super intelligent could be absolutely
Right.
in the sense of, you know, all that intelligence used in a way that doesn't align with the simplest expectations of a human society.
Right.
So I know it got me to think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the other values or like the other sifat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has.
Right.
So you can have a super being, like super intelligence, entity, whatever way you want to define it. It's the analytical part.
Yes.
But if it doesn't understand what rahmah is,
Right.
it doesn't understand what it doesn't have hikmah.
Hikmah, yeah.
It's missing all the other attributes. So
Right.
at that level, even if it's assuming that it's that intelligent thing, that is not what a creator is.
Right. And this goes back to what we mentioned is the dysfunctional way of understanding intelligence, right, in Western philosophy as being mere computation, right, or mere data acquisition, rather than understanding intelligence as wisdom or knowledge or understanding or ethics, right, all of these other aspects that come under intelligence. Now, what are some other aspects of how shirk has led to people in modern culture increasing their dependence on certain things, certain entities? Yes. United Nations. Okay. So this is now a political institution that people put all of their trust in, right? And people have forgotten that help comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They put their complete trust in a institution that at the end of the day is just made up of each nation striving to serve its own political interests. And that's why people are realizing now that you can't expect justice to come about from an organization that basically is made up of the victors of World War II, right? The UN Security Council is the victors of World War II, right? And so the groups that win, they decide we're going to make a Security Council and we're going to ensure that nothing goes against our political interests. And any country that sees something that they don't like, veto power, veto power, veto power, right? So where does the morality come about in this? And people are realizing now that they've elevated this institution to basically a position of shirk, right? Of putting their total dependence in this institution without realizing that it's really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is the one who is in complete control, and therefore our moral accountability is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Excellent. What else? Yes. Sorry? Medicine. Okay. What is an example of in medicine? People, they see the advances of the technological advances in modern medicine, and they put their complete trust in it completely, right? Or they think that whatever happens, the doctor will work some magic, this pill, that surgery, whatever, and all of a sudden, I can cheat death. In fact, within medicine, there is this constant obsession with research on aging, to the extent that people want to identify how can we basically become immortal, right? People want to identify how can we live longer and longer and longer because people are afraid of dying. And they assume that medicine has this ability to provide this almost like a potion of immortality for human beings. So that's one example. What else related to that? Was there something else you had in mind related to medicine and people putting their total trust in it? Right. Right. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a problem related to a concept called naturalism, right? So when human beings become so obsessed with attributing everything to forces in nature, that they slowly, and even Muslims are affected by this, they start to forget the fact that these forces in nature are under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rububiyyah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's absolute lordship. And so we have, in Islam, we have the concept of tawakkul, and we also have the concept of al-akhd bil asbab, right? Ittikhadul asbab, taking the means, is you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you also take the means, but you understand these means are under the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from a medical perspective, as a medical doctor, we know that whenever we initiate a therapy for a patient, there is the possibility of failure, right? We can never guarantee the outcome for a patient. Every day we see things in medicine which surprises us and makes us as physicians realize our own limitations. So rather than medicine giving us this idea that we are infallible or we have some God complex and we can do everything, actually medicine shows us how much is really beyond our control. We have examples like simple case where a patient comes in with appendicitis, right? Or they have an inflamed appendix, simple surgery, they should be out, no problem. And then they have one complication after another, and they end up getting a fistula, and they get an aortic leak, and an infection, and this, and then all of a sudden, this patient is in hospital for months, they're in the ICU, and then what happens? And the patient passes away. Young patient. So all of this shows us, you can never guarantee anything in medicine. You have to do your best, take advantage of the most effective means, but recognize we are fallible human beings. And any physician that doesn't recognize that, that's actually a very dangerous physician, because they will give you a false sense of security in the therapies. You have to understand the limitations and not put your absolute dependence in them. Yes?
Around that, just
Yeah.
the opposite of this hyper-awareness of patient suffering. You want to, physicians are sometimes being on the other side around, euthanasia or
Right.
death.
Right.
I'm curious, how does that relate? You usually think about medicine as curative, but from the shirk perspective, like saying, you have suffering, so
Yeah, so that's a very interesting thing, and this ties into the fact that our culture has, one of the things that our modern culture has done is it has done shirk with the concept of pleasure. Right? The concept of pleasure has been elevated to basically be the ilah, the God of society. And the Quran mentions this attitude. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Do you not see the one who takes as his God his own desires? His own desires. So this is now, what do you have when a society elevates pleasure to become its ultimate principle in society? Or hedonism, basically, that's what it is. Now you have the entertainment industry becomes the most important industry in the society, right? The education industry becomes the least important. Entertainers are paid 10 times, 100 times more than educators, right? Because that's where people put all their priority. And even within the medical field, as you're pointing out, all the emphasis is on just pleasure and removal of pain, to the extent that now we talk about medical assistance in dying, which is an outcome of that idea of life no longer being worth living if there is any pain or discomfort. And this is actually something that's very interesting, because this year Canada was supposed to legally expand the list of indications for medical assistance in dying. So for those who are not in the medical field, medical assistance in dying is this concept of physician-assisted suicide. A patient says, you know what, this is too much. I want my doctor to help me to just end my life, right? It used to be the case that the patient had to have foreseeable death. They had to have a terminal disease. There's no way to cure the disease. Almost every year, there's removal of certain conditions, and they're expanding the scope, right? And to the extent that this year they were, early on at the beginning of this year, they were supposed to expand it to include people who have as their sole underlying condition mental illness. And there was a lot of discussion and debate about how problematic that would be. And in the end, they ended up delaying it. And one of the reasons why they delayed it, some of the doctors pointed out that how are we going to distinguish between suicidal ideation from a quote-unquote reasoned wish to die? Which if you think about it, is a very shocking statement philosophically. What does that mean, a reasoned wish to die? It basically means that it could be totally reasonable for somebody to want to end their life. And if you follow that line of reasoning, then why restrict it even to people who have an illness? Just open it up to anyone. I mean, in Scandinavian countries, there's talk about this. Or you could have a machine where people just decide, okay, that's it. I'm done with living my life. I climb in the machine, press a button, and this kind of toxic gas comes out, and I just end my life. Because if you think that there is no purpose of life other than increasing enjoyment and pleasure, then what's the point of continuing if the foreseeable future has only pain and suffering? There is no meaning to that. And this is part of aql, right? You see how this is part of aql because it's how you rationally evaluate the choices in your life. How can you engage in any rational evaluation if you don't even understand the value of your life to begin with? That's why it's all tied together. So you see this example of, and actually, it's not just a new thing. There are atheist philosophers who previously articulated this idea, like the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who was an influence on Friedrich Nietzsche. Arthur Schopenhauer, he has a number of interesting quotes, but one of the things basically he says is that when you look at how life is just pointless suffering, he says it would be better if we did not exist at all. He's known as the pessimistic philosopher. It would be better if human beings did not exist at all. He said there is no reason for us to exist and there's no benefit to continued existence. Basically, the lazim, the necessary consequence of his view is that everyone should be ending their life because there is no point to anyone's existence. It's just suffering, right? So you have this point of view, and somebody might say, "Oh, that's very reasonable. That's very rational. That's my aql. That's what my aql says." And you look at that and you say, "That is such a bizarre, irrational conclusion." But for somebody else, they say that is rationality. That is the epitome of rationality. So you can see how, depending on your worldview, depending on whether a person has tawheed or shirk, it can completely skew your understanding of rationality. Because shirk can elevate pleasure to be this ultimate principle, and then you don't even know why you exist. You don't even know what you're living for. Does that make sense? Yes.
I mean, I'm thinking of the form of shirk when it comes to legislation, not beyond the issue of the government, just in general, thinking that human beings have the ability to make up laws.
Right.
So let's say, okay, we can kill people now, if it's suicide, you just
right.
people exercise, really, that's what
right.
you're doing, But every once in a while there's this cool idea, eugenics, a century ago, now killing people. And so you see this even on the huge timeline shift. If you go with the pantheon of gods,
right.
millennia ago, no one went this far in our time.
Right.
You see humans, basically, Brittany, when she comes up with an idea about veganism and makes it a policy, whatever.
Right.
We all need to kneel to Brittany.
Right.
It's a very normalized thing, this notion of a human entity capable of legislating something.
Right.
It's universally binding across the
right.
entire globe.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to term this.
That is the essence of shirk. That is the essence of shirk, right? Because now, and you explained it perfectly, you have these trends, whether it's coming from somebody like Elon Musk, right? Or Britney Spears, or whatever it is, right? People have these ideas where they elevate somebody and they're like, this person has started a fad, now we all need to adopt it. We all need to follow it. The extent to which people follow celebrities is actually crazy. Like, again, coming back to the medical perspective, there are people who get cosmetic surgeries to make their face look like celebrities. Like they undergo maybe 30, 40 surgeries on their face to try to make their face look like, for example, Justin Bieber. Like this is the extent of their ibadah of him, their worship of him, that they like, I want to make my my physical features look exactly like this guy. I mean, you would say that is irrational. But for that person, if that is their ilah, For them, it's an entirely rational thing to do. Like for us, like this should be a perversion of what medicine is for. Medicine is not for this, right? But you have this. You have people doing all these kind of things, crazy things. So this is another example. Anything else on this point before we go to the next point about shirk? Yes.
Desire for fame and praise.
Right, excellent. So this is a big one. So people, especially with social media, they have this extreme desire for fame, praise, and to be known, to be recognized, right? So people do everything for quote unquote farming likes, right? They want to post memes, they want to post every detail about their life. They go to the washroom, they eat something, they post it on Twitter or Instagram, right? Whatever they're doing. And that becomes their ilah. And it's really interesting to see how it takes over their life and how it destroys their life, really. Like there was, I just remember seeing like several examples of famous couples who like run vlogs, and people follow these couples and they're like, oh, you know, we love this husband-wife pair, they make these videos and whatever, and then they find out, you know, like a few years later, oh, they're divorced and it was terrible, it was all fake, you know, and whatever. There's so many examples of this, so many examples. And, you know, these people are making a video and they're like, yeah, it was terrible. Every time we would make a video, we'd just be fighting. We'd be screaming at each other. And then the camera goes on and we're smiling. We're like, guys, press that like button and subscribe and whatever. And it's literally like, why are you engaged in this kind of perverse type of dress up and pretend? Because you literally believe this is the most important thing in your life, right? It is a type of worship. It is a type of ibadah where you are subjugating yourself for this. You wanted to add something?
I was just going to add, even the terminology around social media is really shaky, like the idea of getting followers, right?
Right. Yeah. Getting followers, celebrity influencers, like with the idea of influencer, yes?
That came to mind. Like this whole positivity thing, you know, and people saying law of attraction.
Right.
You put your
Yes, this is another example of shirk, yeah.
Unfortunately, even amongst Muslims, I'm seeing this. So
Right.
you have your gratitude journal, you put your positive vibes to the universe.
Yeah, so the law of attraction is this alternative to dua, which is that you have to manifest, I think they use the word manifest, right? Manifest this thing in your life, and if you want it, then the universe will like give it to you and whatever. Basically, what are you doing? The universe is inanimate matter, according to this worldview, but now you've deified it, right? You've given it the shirky kind of powers and attributes and this control over yourself, literally to the point of worshiping it. And, you know, there are other things.